The beginning. Marcus Thompson had always been the class clown. Even at 35, working as a mid-level systems administrator at a tech company in Austin, he couldn't resist making people laugh. His co-workers knew him as the guy who would crack jokes during boring meetings and send funny memes to lighten the mood during stressful deadlines. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when Marcus stumbled upon what he thought was comedy gold. He was scrolling through LinkedIn during his lunch break, looking at job postings more out of curiosity than necessity. That's when he saw it. A posting for a high-level government position with an impressive title that made him chuckle. CENTCOM Commander, Central Command Commander, one of the most prestigious military positions in the United States. The job description talked about overseeing military operations across multiple continents, managing thousands of personnel, and making decisions that could affect global security. Marcus screenshot the posting and immediately shared it in his group chat with college friends. "Hey guys, found my next career move," he typed, adding a few laughing emojis. His friends responded with their usual banter. "Yeah, right, Marcus," and "You can't even command your cat to stay off your keyboard." But Marcus was just getting started. He had an idea that seemed hilarious at the time. What if he actually applied for the position? Not seriously, of course, but just to see what would happen. He imagined some government worker having a good laugh at his application before tossing it in the trash. That evening, after finishing his regular work, Marcus sat down at his home computer with a beer and decided to craft what he considered would be the most entertaining fake application of his life. He opened up his resume and began adding completely fictional military experience. He invented a backstory where he had served as a strategic coffee distribution officer in the Great Cafeteria Wars of 2010. He listed his skills as expert in tactical bathroom breaks and advanced negotiations with vending machines. Under leadership experience, he wrote about successfully commanding a team of imaginary soldiers in multiple Call of Duty campaigns. Marcus spent hours crafting this absurd application, making sure it was obviously fake but still formatted professionally. He even created fake references, including his childhood friend Dave as General David Big Dave Rodriguez, expert in backyard BBQ operations. The application was so ridiculous that Marcus was convinced no one would take it seriously for even a second. He included a cover letter explaining how his experience managing IT tickets had prepared him for managing international military operations. He wrote about how dealing with angry users who couldn't remember their passwords was excellent training for handling diplomatic crises. After finishing his masterpiece of comedy, Marcus showed it to his girlfriend, Sarah, who was studying for her nursing degree. She read through it and shook her head, laughing despite herself. "Marcus, you're not actually going to send this, are you?" she asked. "Come on, it's harmless," Marcus replied. "Some government worker will get a good laugh, and that'll be the end of it. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? They say no?" Sarah looked concerned. "I don't know, honey. This seems like it could get you in trouble." But Marcus was already caught up in the excitement of his prank. He had never done anything this bold before, and the idea of making someone's day with his humor was too appealing to pass up. He had always believed that laughter was the best medicine, and surely the government needed more of that. The next morning at work, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about his application. During his lunch break, he made the decision that would change everything. He logged into the government website, filled out all the required forms with his joke information, attached his ridiculous resume, and hit submit. The confirmation page appeared, thanking him for his interest in serving his country and informing him that his application would be reviewed by the appropriate personnel. Marcus took a screenshot and sent it to his group chat with the caption, "It's official. I'm going to be your next CENTCOM commander." His friends responded with a mix of laughter and disbelief. Some thought he was joking about even applying, while others warned him that he might be crossing a line, but Marcus brushed off their concerns. In his mind, this was just an elaborate joke that would be over within a few days. For the next week, Marcus went about his regular routine. He fixed servers, responded to IT tickets, and made his usual jokes around the office. He had almost forgotten about his application when something unexpected happened. It was the following Thursday, exactly 1 week after he had submitted his application, when Marcus received an email that made his blood run cold. The sender was listed as U.S. Department of Defense Personnel Review Board, and the subject line read, Application for CENTCOM Commander Position. Initial review completed. Marcus stared at his computer screen in shock. He had expected his application to disappear into some digital void, never to be seen again. The fact that he was receiving any response at all was terrifying. With trembling hands, he opened the email. It was professional and formal, thanking him for his interest in the position and informing him that his application had passed the initial screening process. The email went on to explain that due to the sensitive nature of the position, a comprehensive background check would be conducted, and he would be contacted by federal investigators within the next few business days. Marcus read the email 3 times before the full weight of his situation hit him. This wasn't a joke anymore. Somehow, his obviously fake application had been taken seriously by the United States government, and now federal investigators were going to be looking into his background. He immediately called Sarah, his voice shaking as he explained what had happened. She was silent for a long moment before speaking. "Marcus, I told you this was a bad idea. What are you going to do now?" Marcus didn't have an answer. He sat at his desk for the rest of the day in a daze, barely able to focus on his work. Every time his phone rang or he received an email, his heart would race, thinking it might be federal agents coming to question him. That night, Marcus barely slept. He lay awake thinking about how his harmless prank had somehow spiraled completely out of control. He wondered if he should call someone to explain the situation, but he had no idea who to contact or what to say. How do you explain that you applied for one of the most important military positions in the country as a joke? The weekend passed agonizingly slowly. Marcus spent most of it researching what kind of trouble he might be in for submitting a false application to the government. The more he read, the more worried he became. Terms like fraud and false statements to federal agencies kept appearing in his searches. Monday morning arrived, and Marcus was barely functional at work. He kept checking his email and phone, expecting federal agents to show up at his office at any moment. His coworkers began to notice his strange behavior, but he couldn't bring himself to tell anyone what was happening. It was Tuesday afternoon when Marcus received the phone call that would change his life forever. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. area code. Marcus's hands were shaking as he answered. "Hello? Is this Marcus Thompson?" asked a serious male voice. "Yes, this is Marcus," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Thompson, this is Agent Johnson with the Defense Security Service. We need to schedule an appointment to discuss your recent application for a Department of Defense position. Would tomorrow at 2 p.m. work for you?" Marcus felt like the world was spinning around him. This was really happening. Federal agents wanted to meet with him about his joke application. Yes, that would be fine," Marcus managed to say. "Excellent. We'll be conducting this interview at your workplace. Please ensure you have the necessary documentation regarding your military service and leadership experience readily available." After hanging up, Marcus sat in stunned silence. Tomorrow he would have to face federal agents and somehow explain that everything in his application was a complete fabrication. The joke that had seemed so funny just 2 weeks ago now felt like the biggest mistake of his life. The investigation. Wednesday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky that perfectly matched Marcus's mood. He had barely slept for the 3rd night in a row, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios about his upcoming meeting with federal agents. He dressed in his best suit, which he normally reserved for job interviews and funerals. wondering if this might qualify as both. At work, Marcus tried to act normal, but his coworkers could tell something was wrong. His usual jokes were absent, replaced by nervous glances toward the elevator and constant checking of his watch. Every time the elevator doors opened, his heart would skip a beat. Sarah had offered to take time off from her nursing clinical to be there for moral support, but Marcus didn't want to drag her into his mess any deeper than she already was. This was his mistake to face alone. At exactly 1:55 p.m., Marcus received a call from the front desk. "Marcus, there are two gentlemen here to see you. They say they're from the government." Marcus felt his legs go weak. "I'll be right down," he managed to say. The elevator ride to the lobby felt like it lasted forever. When the doors opened, Marcus saw two men in dark suits standing near the reception desk. They looked exactly like what he imagined federal agents would look like. Serious expressions, professional demeanor, and an air of authority that made Marcus feel like a child about to be scolded. "Mr. Thompson?" the taller of the two men asked, extending his hand. "I'm Agent Johnson, and this is Agent Rodriguez from the Defense Security Service." Marcus shook their hands, noticing how firm and confident their grips were compared to his own clammy palm. "Nice to meet you," he said weakly. "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" Agent Rodriguez asked, looking around the busy lobby. Marcus led them to a small conference room that his company used for client meetings. As they sat down, Agent Johnson opened a thick folder while Agent Rodriguez pulled out a digital recorder. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Johnson began, "we're here to discuss your application for the CENTCOM commander position. Before we begin, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded, and anything you say can be used in any subsequent legal proceedings. Do you understand?" The word legal proceedings hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. "I understand," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "Let's start with your military background. According to your application, you served in several classified operations. Can you tell us more about your service record?" This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. He took a deep breath and made a decision that would prove to be crucial. Instead of continuing the charade or trying to dig himself deeper into a hole of lies, he decided to tell the truth. "Agents, I need to be completely honest with you," Marcus said, his hands trembling slightly. "I have never served in the military. Everything in that application was fictional." The two agents exchanged glances. Agent Johnson closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Thompson, are you telling us that you submitted a fraudulent application to the United States government for one of the most sensitive military positions in our nation?" "It wasn't supposed to be fraudulent," Marcus said quickly. "It was supposed to be a joke. The application was so obviously fake that I thought anyone reading it would immediately realize it wasn't serious." Agent Rodriguez stopped the recording and looked at his partner. They whispered to each other for a moment before Agent Johnson spoke again. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. The position you applied for involves access to classified information that could compromise national security. False applications for such positions are taken very seriously." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. "I never meant for this to happen. I thought it would just be dismissed immediately. I never imagined anyone would take it seriously." Agent Johnson reopened the folder and pulled out a copy of Marcus's application. "Let's go through this together. You listed your position as Strategic Coffee Distribution Officer. You claim to have expertise in tactical bathroom breaks. Did you really think this would be dismissed without investigation?" Looking at his application through the agent's eyes, Marcus began to see how his joke might not have been as obviously fake as he thought. "I realize now that it was incredibly stupid," he said. "I just didn't think it through." Agent Rodriguez restarted the recording. "Mr. Thompson, we've already conducted a preliminary background check. We know that you work in IT, you have no criminal record, and you have no connections to any foreign governments or terrorist organizations. What we need to understand is why someone with no malicious intent would submit such an application." For the next hour, Marcus explained his thought process, his history of making jokes, and his complete lack of understanding about how government applications were processed. He told them about his friend's reactions, Sarah's warnings, and his growing realization that he had made a terrible mistake. The agents listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. They seemed particularly interested in whether anyone else was involved in creating the application, or if Marcus had been put up to it by someone else. "I did this entirely on my own," Marcus insisted. "No one else knew I was actually going to submit it until after I had already done it." Agent Johnson made several notes in his folder. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you directly. Have you ever had any contact with foreign intelligence services? Have you ever been approached by anyone asking you to apply for government positions?" "No, absolutely not," Marcus replied firmly. "I barely travel outside of Texas, let alone have contact with foreign agents." Agent Rodriguez pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call. Marcus could hear him speaking in low tones, but couldn't make out the words. Agent Johnson continued asking questions about Marcus's background, his job, and his reasons for applying. After Agent Rodriguez finished his call, he rejoined them at the table. "Mr. Thompson, here's what's going to happen. We're going to recommend that no charges be filed in this case, but there will be consequences." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by anxiety about what those consequences might be. "First," Agent Johnson continued, "your name will be flagged in all government systems. You will never be eligible for any federal employment, including military service. Any future applications you submit will be automatically rejected." "Second," Agent Rodriguez added, "this incident will be documented in your permanent record. While we won't be pressing charges, this information could be accessed during background checks for certain private sector jobs, particularly those involving government contracts." Marcus nodded, understanding that his moment of poor judgment would have lasting consequences. "Finally," Agent Johnson said, "you'll need to sign a statement acknowledging that you understand the seriousness of what you did and agreeing never to submit false information to any government agency again." As Marcus signed the paperwork, Agent Rodriguez offered some unexpected advice. "Mr. Thompson, I can tell this was a genuine mistake born out of poor judgment rather than malicious intent. Use this experience to think more carefully about your actions in the future." After the agents left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, processing what had just happened. He had avoided criminal charges, but his careless joke had permanently altered his future opportunities. When he finally returned to his desk, his manager was waiting for him. "Marcus, I need to speak with you privately," she said with a concerned expression. In her office, Marcus learned that the company's HR department had been contacted by the federal agents as part of their background check. While his job wasn't in immediate jeopardy, there would be a formal reprimand added to his personnel file. "Marcus, I have to ask, why would you apply for a military command position while working here?" his manager asked. Marcus explained the situation, watching as his manager's expression shifted from concern to disbelief to disappointment. "Marcus, this was incredibly irresponsible. The company's reputation could have been affected if this had gone differently." That evening, Marcus drove home in silence, contemplating how drastically his life had changed in just 2 weeks. What started as what he thought was a harmless prank had resulted in a federal investigation, permanent consequences for his career prospects, and damage to his reputation at work. When he walked into his apartment, Sarah was waiting with dinner prepared and a sympathetic expression. She had taken the afternoon off after all, knowing he would need support regardless of how the meeting went. "How did it go?" she asked gently. Marcus told her everything, The agent's questions, the consequences he would face, and the reality that his joke had been taken seriously by people whose job it was to protect national security. "I feel like such an idiot," Marcus said, slumping onto the couch. "How did I not realize this would be a problem?" Sarah sat beside him and took his hand. "Marcus, you made a mistake. A big one, but a mistake nonetheless. The important thing is that you told the truth when it mattered." As they talked through the events of the day, Marcus began to understand how his actions, while not malicious, had been incredibly naive. He had treated a serious government position as the subject of a joke, not considering the real people whose job it was to evaluate candidates for roles that affected national security. The next few days passed quietly. Marcus returned to his normal work routine, though he noticed his co-workers treating him differently. Word had somehow spread about his meeting with federal agents, though the details remained unclear to most people. Marcus found himself reflecting on the concept of consequences and how quickly a moment of poor judgment could spiral beyond his control. He had always prided himself on being harmless, but he now understood that harm could come from thoughtlessness just as much as from malicious intent. A week after his meeting with the agents, Marcus received one final communication from the government, a letter confirming the resolution of his case and reiterating the permanent restrictions on his eligibility for federal employment. As he read the letter, Marcus realized that his experience, while embarrassing and consequential, had taught him valuable lessons about responsibility, the seriousness of government institutions, and the importance of thinking through the potential consequences of his actions before acting on impulse. The aftermath. 3 months had passed since Marcus's encounter with federal agents, and his life had settled into a new normal, one where he thought very carefully before making any jokes about serious subjects. The immediate crisis had passed, but the long-term effects of his decision continued to ripple through various aspects of his life. At work, Marcus had gradually rebuilt his relationships with his co-workers, though his reputation had fundamentally changed. Where he once was known as the office comedian, he was now seen as someone who had learned a hard lesson about boundaries. His manager had been supportive, but made it clear that any future incidents would result in immediate termination. The most unexpected development came when Marcus's story began to spread beyond his immediate circle. One of his co-workers had a friend who worked for a local news station, and somehow the story of the guy who jokingly applied to be a military commander made its way to a reporter's attention. Marcus first learned about the media interest when he received a phone call at work from a journalist asking if he would be willing to share his story publicly. His initial reaction was panic. The last thing he wanted was more attention for his mistake. "Mr. Thompson, we're not looking to embarrass you," the reporter explained. "We think your story could actually serve as an important lesson about internet security and the seriousness of government applications." After discussing it with Sarah, Marcus decided to participate in the interview, hoping that sharing his experience might prevent others from making similar mistakes. The resulting news segment was surprisingly sympathetic, presenting Marcus not as a troublemaker, but as someone who had learned a valuable lesson about taking government institutions seriously. The news coverage brought unexpected responses. Marcus received dozens of emails and social media messages from people sharing their own stories of pranks or jokes that had gone too far. Many thanked him for speaking publicly about his mistake, saying it had helped them understand the potential consequences of their own thoughtless actions. However, not all the attention was positive. Some online commentators criticized Marcus harshly, questioning his intelligence and suggesting that anyone stupid enough to apply for a military command position as a joke deserved whatever consequences they faced. Reading these comments was difficult, but Marcus tried to focus on the constructive feedback and learning opportunities. One particularly meaningful response came from a retired military officer who had served in various command positions throughout his career. The veteran reached out to Marcus through LinkedIn with a message that would profoundly impact his perspective. Son, the message read, I saw your story on the news and I wanted you to know that while your application was obviously inappropriate, your willingness to own up to your mistake shows character. Many people in my position would have been angry about someone treating our roles as a joke, but I can see that you've learned from this experience. The veteran went on to explain the real responsibilities and pressures that come with military command positions, helping Marcus understand why his application had been taken so seriously. These positions involve making life and death decisions for thousands of people, he wrote. The screening process exists for good reason. This exchange led to a friendship that would change Marcus's perspective on military service and public service in general. The retired officer, Colonel Martinez, invited Marcus to attend a Veterans Day ceremony at a local military base, where Marcus gained a deeper appreciation for the dedication and sacrifice required of military personnel. At the ceremony, Marcus met several active-duty service members and veterans who shared their experiences. He was struck by the professionalism, dedication, and genuine sense of responsibility these individuals demonstrated. It made his joke application seem even more inappropriate in hindsight, but also helped him understand how he could channel his experience into something positive. Inspired by these interactions, Marcus decided to volunteer with a local organization that helped veterans transition to civilian careers. His IT skills proved valuable in helping former service members update their resumes and navigate online job applications. The irony wasn't lost on him that someone who had made a joke of applying for a military position was now helping real veterans find employment. Through his volunteer work, Marcus met James, a former Army sergeant who was struggling to translate his military experience into civilian job qualifications. As Marcus helped James polish his resume and practice for interviews, he was amazed by the breadth of the veteran's experience and leadership abilities. You know, James said during one of their sessions, I heard about your story from Colonel Martinez. I have to admit, when I first heard it, I was pretty angry. But seeing how you're trying to make amends and actually help veterans now, that means something. This conversation marked a turning point for Marcus. He realized that while he couldn't undo his mistake, he could use the experience to contribute positively to causes he had inadvertently disrespected. Marcus's relationship with Sarah also evolved during this period. The stress of the federal investigation had initially put strain on their relationship, but working through the crisis together had ultimately strengthened their bond. Sarah had been impressed by how Marcus handled the investigation once he decided to tell the truth, and she supported his efforts to turn the experience into something positive. I'm proud of how you've handled all of this, Sarah told him one evening as they were preparing dinner. You could have just tried to forget about it and move on, but instead you're actually trying to learn and help others. 6 months after the incident, Marcus received another unexpected phone call. This time it was from a cybersecurity company that had heard about his story through the news coverage. They were developing training programs for companies about internet security and appropriate online behavior, and they wanted Marcus to share his experience as part of their educational materials. We think your story perfectly illustrates how seemingly harmless online actions can have serious real-world consequences, the company representative explained. Would you be willing to participate in creating educational content about responsible internet use? This opportunity excited Marcus because it offered a chance to transform his embarrassing mistake into a tool for educating others. He worked with the cybersecurity company to develop presentations and training materials that used his experience as a case study in thinking through the potential consequences of online actions. The training program became quite popular, particularly among college students and young professionals who could relate to Marcus's initial mindset. His presentations emphasized the importance of considering how online actions might be perceived by others, especially when dealing with official or professional contexts. During one presentation at a local university, a student asked Marcus whether he regretted his decision to apply for the position as a joke. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "I absolutely regret the decision itself," he said. "It was thoughtless and disrespectful, but I don't regret the learning experience it became. This mistake taught me lessons about responsibility, respect, and the real-world impact of my actions that I might never have learned otherwise." Another student followed up by asking whether Marcus would ever consider actual public service, given his newfound appreciation for government work. Marcus smiled and shook his head. "I'm permanently barred from federal employment because of my mistake," he explained. "But I've found ways to serve through volunteering and education that are probably better suited to my skills anyway." As Marcus approached the one-year anniversary of his application, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. His perspective on humor, responsibility, and service had matured significantly. He had developed new friendships with veterans and cybersecurity professionals, found meaningful volunteer work, and discovered a passion for education that he never knew he had. The consequences of his actions were permanent. He would never be eligible for federal employment, and the incident would always be part of his background record. But Marcus had learned to view these restrictions not as punishments, but as reminders of the importance of thoughtful decision-making. His relationship with humor had also evolved. Marcus still enjoyed making people laugh, but he was much more careful about the context and potential impact of his jokes. He had learned the difference between humor that brings people together and humor that might inadvertently cause harm or show disrespect. One evening, as Marcus was preparing for another presentation about internet responsibility, he received a message from Agent Johnson, one of the federal agents who had investigated his case. The message was brief but meaningful. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted you to know that we've been following your presentations and volunteer work. It's rare to see someone turn a mistake into such a positive contribution to their community. Keep up the good work." This acknowledgement from someone who had witnessed his mistake firsthand meant more to Marcus than any praise he had received for his educational work. It confirmed that he had successfully transformed a moment of poor judgment into genuine learning and service. As Marcus looked back on his journey from joke applicant to educator and volunteer, he understood that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most embarrassing mistakes. His experience had taught him that actions have consequences, that institutions deserve respect, and that personal growth often comes from facing the results of poor decisions head-on. The title that had once seemed so funny to him, CENTCOM Commander, now represented something much more serious in his mind. It represented the real people who dedicate their lives to serving others, the weight of responsibility that comes with leadership, and the importance of approaching serious matters with the gravity they deserve. Marcus had learned that the best way to honor the people he had inadvertently disrespected was not just to apologize, but to use his experience to educate others and contribute positively to his community. His joke application had ended his dreams of federal employment, but it had opened doors to forms of service he never would have considered otherwise.